Now, why we chose to talk about them a little bit tonight is because Roger Ebert has a new memoir out. It's his latest book. It's called Life Itself, and it's really good. I mean, anyone that is in tune with his blogs, which his blogs have taken a highly personal turn in the past few years since his health problems, and I mean, he's become a very emotional writer, and those entries have been fascinating. Are we still on the air?
Yeah.
By the way? Okay.
Yeah, we are.
The movie is, obviously, it's a memoir. It takes this tone as well, and you hear about his growing up, his love of the movies, his interviews that he did, the days that he spent with Robert Mitchum and John Wayne and Herzog and Scorsese, and then his illness, his rapport with Gene Siskel, his theories of criticism. I mean, it's all there. It's well worth a read if you're interested in criticism or how his thinking about movies developed. So it's available now, and you can purchase it here on our homepage. Life Itself is the name of it. But Siskel and Ebert, I mean, it's been years and years since Gene Siskel died. Mm-hmm. When you think about their contribution, what do you think their major contribution was to film or film criticism, Chris?
I think we probably all agree that their biggest contribution was sort of making it palatable, which is, and immediately that's what we think of. But the truth is, I haven't read a lot of Gene Siskel's writing, but Roger Ebert is also quite a good writer. So it's twofold for me. Number one, I think of immediately he helped to make it so palatable for the masses. You know, it's not people like Pauline Kael, as much as I like reading her because she was a great writer. But she was a tremendous blowhard, and it was very difficult, I think, for the masses to read people like that. And a lot of the early film critics, it's very obtuse and it's very scholarly, and it sort of get lost in it, and there's a lot of references, whereas Roger Ebert sort of made it, palatable, made it a little bit more digestible for people. Certainly brought it to the mainstream with television and things like that. But I also don't want to sell him short and make him sound like he's, the McDonald's of film criticism, because the truth is, I think that right now he is literally the best film critic that we have. And we have many very, very good ones that I love, but I don't think that anyone is as good a writer as Roger Ebert is, and he always has.
Yeah.
The counter-argument to that is that Siskel and Ebert as a team, the people that were worshippers of Pauline Kael or Andrew Sarris, the intellectual criticism, felt that they, as a team, stupefied and kind of mass-marketed film criticism. So that's a less polite way of saying palatable for them.
Yeah, well, that's TV, though, isn't it? I mean, you can't, when Roger Ebert gives one of his reviews, like take his review of, I don't know, something like Fargo, like Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert were doing the show together at that time. So they did a show, and you can probably go online and look at their verbal review, the two of them, of the movie Fargo. It's probably something like 3 minutes or something like that. But you can also go online and read Roger Ebert's written review of the movie Fargo, and it's probably not the same thing. The TV version is what people consider to be dumbed down. And in that sense, Pauline Kael and those sorts of people that would say that are right. It is true. That TV clip that you get is a dumbed-down version of film criticism, but that shouldn't confuse you into thinking that Roger Ebert is a dumbed-down film critic.
Let me add this, though, before the Internet, especially before the Internet, sneak previews when it was on PBS and then at the movies, when it went into syndication in I guess it was the early 80s, for most of us, that was the only way you could find out about films like Burden of Dreams. I remember when they reviewed that, or Fitz, or that was, you weren't gonna, unless you subscribed to New York Times or New Yorker or something, or a film magazine or something. There was no way that you were really gonna be able to find out about some of these smaller films that they championed, or films that you might, when they did those special episodes, were little-known films that we like that you probably haven't seen, and they were right. We hadn't heard of them, and it was very important in that day and age when no one even knew what the Internet, where we take everything for granted these days. That was a really important service they did. they really introduced you to names of directors and actors and actresses films I'm sorry, that no one had really in the mainstream had heard of. No one was talking about. So you would see these foreign movies or these independent movies, like a John Sayles movie, especially John Sayles, or Jim Jarmusch, or things like that, and it was just like, wow, that's really cool. I didn't know you could, because I don't think you had any shows quite like that, unless you had the local TV reviewer who was reviewing a bigger movie 9 times out of 10,
and that's still the singular kind of power of the film critic, but it was on a mass scale with Siskel and Ebert just by the nature of their medium. Now, I mean, but the past few months, or the past month or so, on the new At the Movies show that Ebert produces, they've been rerunning past episodes of sneak previews, like the early days of Siskel and Ebert together, and they've been themed shows,
right,
where they have a little bit more time to breathe and examine films. They did a Women in Peril show, like what is behind the whole I Spit on Your Grave, the endless horror movies where women are being chased and tortured, and then they did the homosexuality in movies. They did a whole show on that, and that allowed them kind of a larger format with more breadth to really examine trends and things. So it wasn't all encapsulated 6-minute segments.
Right.
So, I mean, Chris, when you hear that, I mean, how do you discern their two personalities? Because really, Ebert's come into his own now since Siskel's death, but they were together. They were more than they were as individuals, I think.
Yeah, no, they absolutely were, and that's the thing about that is, people were always trying to say, well, one of them likes the mainstream movies and the other one likes the art house movies, and it always sort of got confused. Talked to one person who thought one liked the action movies and then the other vice versa. It's not really true. You really couldn't put either one of them. Couldn't really put either one of them into a little box like that. It changed. Sometimes Ebert would like the art house movie and Siskel wouldn't, and sometimes Siskel would like the action movie and Ebert wouldn't. It was always different, and that's what was great. They had a chemistry together.
They had great,
the great actors do, and just like Redford and Streisand did, and The Way We Were, and just like Clooney and Jennifer Lopez did in Out of Sight. Like, well, not quite like that. There was a slow motion sex scene. Well, like Lemon and Math out then, for that matter. I mean, they had a great chemistry, and I think that they did care for each other, and it came off on screen. And they also both had the one thing they had in common more than anything was that they both really, really loved movies. They also had great exchanges where they agreed on things. They could sometimes riff with each other, and they would go back and forth, about, and what about this, and what about that, and, they just really got giddy talking to each other about movies that they really, really both loved.
And Fargo is one of those. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But you would say that Ebert was seen as the mainstream guy and Siskel not so much?
I wouldn't say either one of those things.
Yeah.
I would say I don't think that you can fit either one of them into it. I think it was constantly changing. I don't think that, and they tried to do the same thing when it was A.O. Scott and Michael Phillips. Like they tried to do sort of, people tried to put them into the same box, and it doesn't really work that way. There's no, with Siskel and Ebert in particular, there was no nerdy one and no mainstream one. There wasn't. It didn't work like that at all. I agree with Ebert about Full Metal Jacket. I don't think it's one of his better films. I know exactly the push that he's talking about. I do think it's cliched, and I think you can see it in lots of other war pictures. I mean, the movie's nowhere near what Dr. Strangelove or 2001 or The Shining are. It's not even in the same ballpark. And I would be surprised if even Kubrick wouldn't have told you that.
Or Paths of War.
Yeah,
it's definitely not. It's definitely not.
Paths of Glory. But as far as the film criticism argument goes, I agree with Siskel. I agree with. Actually, no. I agree with Ebert on both of them.
You know what? I do too.
You can't compare the Benji review because you're reviewing a movie for children, and Full Metal Jacket is not a movie for
definitely
children.
not for kids.
I mean, you definitely have to review a movie based on its own merits and its
trying to do.
But Siskel's counter argument to that was, so if a movie aims low and it achieves it, it's a better movie.
Yeah, well, that's where the star rating or the thumb rating fails.
Yeah.
You know, that's where that sort of thing fails. But you have to take that into account. I mean, it's just like, you know, it's like different subjects in class. You know, I mean, a grade in math is not the same as a grade in English. 100% in math is not the same as 100% in English. One is objective and one is subjective, or creative writing for that matter.
Right.
You know.
I mean, I have a clip from their review of Crash too.
I remember that.
Siskel.
Yeah, me too.
Crash is a tough one, but I mean that's an interesting thing too, because when you see a movie like Crash, I mean it's so mystifying. How do you go about reviewing it? And actually, their argument over, you know, the whole meaning of the film or whether it has one, I mean that speaks directly to the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean it's confusing in that way.
Yeah, it's based on a book that a lot of people would, you know, you got to hand it to Cronenberg for taking books like Naked Lunch, which I would have said I still think is unfilmable, even with his version, which I find very interesting. It's a very interesting movie. But Crash, J.G. Ballard, with the exception of Empire of the Sun and maybe the sequel, The Kindness of Women, that's not easy stuff to bring to the screen.
Yeah.
And in Crash especially, and there are other novels by him, and even his last novel. So I don't even know if you could bring that. I haven't read it yet, but from what I hear, that would be difficult to interpret too. But Cronenberg is the person that you would go to for something like that. But I wouldn't say I was disappointed in Crash, but it was like lukewarm to me. I mean, I didn't see. When you're watching something like that, the controversy is just like, okay, people really just need to get out more, I guess. But
well, one of them is saying, I didn't see the point. And the other one is saying, there wasn't a point. That's the point.
Yeah. That's an interesting, I don't remember the movie or the book that well.
Any thoughts, Chris? Is there a point to Crash?
Yeah, it's a good book and a good movie. I thought it was a good interpretation of that book.
No, I mean, it's the one guy I would go to especially at that time. The only other director I think is Aronofsky, but you know.
Yeah, maybe so. And he's sort of the rightful heir to Cronenberg, maybe in some ways. But no, I think it's a good book, and I don't feel that way about Naked Lunch, which is another book I read and liked, and don't like the movie of it. Back to Siskel and Ebert, like that's just another example of how great they were both really good speakers. You know, I mean that was all off the cuff stuff that was happening there. They might have had little conversations beforehand about, you know, you actually liked it. I don't know what their thing was. I don't know whether
they didn't talk at all. They would go to the same screening. They would walk to the elevator together when it was over. They did not speak at all.
I know that Ebert said the one time that Siskel ever spoke to him during a movie was in Fargo, actually. That he actually said to him, came over and said, "Isn't this great?" or something to that effect. So yeah, I had heard that before. So you know, I mean, that's what's so great. This is all sort of off the cuff stuff, and they just had these great little moments. We're looking at clips of them, you know, sort of arguing. There were thousands of them disagreeing, sometimes to this extent and sometimes to a lesser extent, and thousands of clips of them just talking. And it was always interesting. I mean, the show was on for, 25 years or something like that. So it was really, really good stuff. They just had a great chemistry together.
Mm-hmm.
And Jason O'Brien actually sent us a clip. I mean, I didn't upload it or anything, but of them agreeing on a really horrible movie, which was Jaws: The Revenge. Just kind of their mouths agape, talking about how terrible this movie was. And Ebert,
I think I remember that actually. Yeah.
Ebert was like, "Tell me something, Gene. At the end of the first Jaws, what happens? Shark dies. Into the second, shark dies. Into the third," he said, "Yeah, they die. The shark dies in every single one." And he's like, "So who is the shark?" And Gene was like, "It's a cousin. It's a family member." Yeah, it was a very entertaining review. I mean, but they're also time capsules, since these reviews, many of them are available on YouTube and stuff, of oftentimes how wrong-headed they were. Not necessarily wrong-headed, but how history has disproven them. You know, their take, one of them didn't like Apocalypse Now. like really disliked it.
Well, a lot of people disliked Apocalypse.
Yeah, I remember when Apocalypse Now came out, it was,
right, but not all of those people had TV shows where they could talk about it.
Right.
And one of them didn't like Back to the Future. I think it was Siskel that didn't like Back to the Future. Ebert really panned The Untouchables when very few people were panning that movie. There's a couple of other noteworthy ones, like movies, not necessarily The Untouchables, but movies that are seen as classics now that they just completely panned. And sometimes they went back to them and they finally caught on to what they were missing. I mean, they weren't above admitting their mistakes either. But there was some kind of pride that both of them wanted to protect from the other, and they kind of never wavered from that. I mean, so you could see in these arguments, neither one of them was going to back down or yield that the other one might have a point.
Yeah. They also did the opposite, which is they would sometimes give really good reviews to movies that were really bad, like as far as the time capsule conversation goes. I remember Ebert giving like his 4-star review to the fucking Billy Zane movie, The Phantom. Like, he was talking about
4 stars to that?
Or Knowing. Or Knowing.
Yeah, Knowing is another one.
Well, Knowing, I think he really... that we're already with Knowing. We're in the post...
yeah, it's postmodern. He's defending it a lot lately.
Yeah, I mean... But what about something like Independence Day that they both hated, and then they went back a couple of weeks later and they said, look, we know a lot of you like it, but it's still, we don't like it. They went back and they made a point about that.
Well, this is the same sort of conversation that you could have about them. Like when you talk about a movie like Independence Day, it's like, okay, well, the masses love it, so there's something to be said for that. Like, you can talk about how it sucks all day long.
Right.
It's like Dane Cook. People talk about what a shitty comedian he is, except for there's 15,000 people in Madison Square Garden who disagree with you, and they're all screaming his name. And it was the same thing with, you could make the exact same argument for Roger and Siskel and Ebert. Pauline Kael, and I don't mean to put it all on Pauline Kael, but I mean those types of film critics can say whatever they want about the show at the movies with Siskel and Ebert. The bottom line is people love it, so making something for the masses is not necessarily a bad thing.
No, of course not.
And they love them together too. I mean, because their stints on Letterman and Carson, I mean, those are on YouTube too. Classics, yeah. And a classic moment that's not on YouTube that I haven't found because it's not on there, is when they were on Carson. Chevy Chase was the guest, and they said, "Well, what's the worst movie you've seen this season?" And they were like, "Well, it would have to be Three Amigos," which was the movie that Chevy Chase was on the show to promote.
Oh my God!
Ebert writes about that in his book, and Chevy Chase comes up with a line like, "Well, I can't wait till you guys your movies come out." But then he walked backstage and stood in Ebert's dressing room doorway and said, "I don't think it's such a hot movie either, to be honest with you." In the Letterman thing, they'd always invite them on for skits and things. Like they'd go door to door. That's a really good one.
I remember.
They say, is there anything that Roger and Gene can do for you while you're out? And he said, "Well, my roof needs to be cleaned off, like my gutters." And so then they shows them pulling leaves and stuff off the woman's roof. I mean, they were the odd couple. They were the mainstream odd couple, the real life odd couple, just like you said, the Matthau and Lemon. Okay.
No, they were. I mean, I miss that though. I mean, if someone said, I would love to know what Jeremy the critic in the chat room said, I'd love to know what Siskel thought about recent movies, and would love to see them talk about movies like The Social Network, Tree of Life, or even in the Kill Bill movies and Glorious Bastards. Things that Siskel championed. And remember, Siskel was a big champion of George Lucas, and I would love to. They both loved the original Star Wars trilogy. I would love to have seen Siskel's reaction to the prequels. Well, he would. I mean, I'd be very curious, and we don't have that. So that was always, I'm very sad. But the two of them, there's a spark there you just don't see anywhere else. The two of them they had it.
Yeah, you have to have two people that have equal parts respect and disdain for one another. And I don't think you could have that. I think you'd probably have one or the other.
Right.
It would, yeah.
It's been proven. I mean, they've tried. So, I mean, look how many different guests they had with Ebert after Siskel left. And a lot of them were not meant to be full-time partners, but they were sort of trying whatever they could. They were throwing whatever they could at the wall to see what would stick, and nothing really did. Roper was as good as it got, and Roper was good, and I'm a defender of Roper. I thought he was okay. Even after Roper, then they tried to pair Roper with everybody under the sun, and then they tried to do, Ben Lyons and Ben Mankiewicz, and then it was A.O. Scott and Michael Phillips, and then it was these new people, and everybody is sort of good, and I even got used to Ben Lyons and Ben Mankiewicz, and I even got used to A.O. Scott and Michael Phillips, but nobody's got what Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel had, which was that sort of intangible thing.
Mm-hmm.
Can't really recreate that.
No, you're absolutely right. But it's a big part of our adolescence and our childhood, watching them. I remember watching, like, first-run shows. I remember vividly and seeing them on all the talk shows and stuff. Bob Costas, there's also a great YouTube clip, like a 2-hour conversation with Bob Costas where they go into a lot of stuff. And they clearly respected and loved one another, but that grew over the years because it really wasn't there.
Right. No, early on it definitely wasn't.
Yeah.